Okay, thank you for joining us today for the live conversation with Resistance star Jesse Eisenberg and mime coach Lorin Eric Salm. All attendees are muted and your videos will not be streamed. Since questions were gathered prior to the event, the Q&A and chat features have been turned off. If you have a question or comment after the live conversation, please contact Janine Thompson at thompson.105@osu.edu. Live captioning is available during the live event. To activate the captioning, please click the CC closed caption icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. Also, this webinar is being recorded. A captioned recording of this program will be available within 7 to 10 business days following the event, posted on the University Library's website at library.osu.edu. Thank you, and let's get started. Here to kick us off is Dr. Beth Cattleman.
Hello, I am Dr. Beth Cattleman, curator of the Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee Theater Research Institute at The Ohio State University. I'd like to welcome you to this exciting live event, a conversation with Academy Award nominated actor Jesse Eisenberg and mime coach and mime artist and movement coach Lorin Eric Salm. Mr. Eisenberg and Mr. Salm will be speaking with the director of the Theater Research Institute, Professor Janine Thompson, about their work on the film Resistance. Resistance is based on the true story of how noted mime artist Marcel Marceau joined the French resistance to save the lives of Jewish orphans during World War II. The conversation will begin momentarily, but first I'd like to share with you some brief information about why the Ohio State Libraries are hosting this presentation. The Ohio State University Libraries is home to the Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee Theater Research Institute, or TRI, one of the special collections on campus. The Institute acquires, preserves, and makes accessible materials documenting the performing arts for the purposes of scholarship, education, and enjoyment. And one of the premier collections is the Marcel Marceau American Collection. This slideshow will highlight just a few of the items from that collection. The Marcel Marceau American Collection primarily documents Marceau's United States performances and is comprised of approximately 65 boxes of videos, audio cassettes, photographs, posters, postcards, lithographs, touring records, correspondence, newspaper and magazine clippings, and even a travel case used by Marceau during his American tours. The collection was a gift of the Marcel Marceau Foundation for the Advancement of the Art of Mime, Incorporated, and was acquired through the work of Janine Thompson, who will be conducting today's interviews. In addition to serving as the director of the TRI and holding a professorship in the Department of Theater with the courtesy appointment in the Department of Dance, Thompson is also a former student of Marceau's. Janine's close work with Marcel Marceau spanned over 20 years and included training with him at the Goldston School for Mimes in Ohio and in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and producing 3 of his residencies at Ohio State in 1995, 1998, and 2001. She continues to perform and teach Marceau's techniques to students and other movement artists. The Marcel Marceau American Collection is open to all researchers who are interested in learning more about Marceau's fascinating life, career, and techniques. The collection has been used by numerous researchers, both domestic and international. And in fact, Lorin Eric Salm, mime coach talking with Janine today, has received the Theater Research Institute's Visiting Scholar Award, which will provide financial support for him to come to Ohio State to conduct research in the collection sometime in the near future. The collection has also been used as a basis for theatrical production. In 2014, The Department of Theater at The Ohio State University, in partnership with Ohio State's Advanced Computing Center for the Arts and Design, collaborated on a piece about Marceau entitled, "There Is No Silence." The show was conceived and directed by Professor Janine Thompson and was devised with the help of theater department students who created the script from extensive research they conducted in the Institute's Marceau archive. In addition to the papers and materials of the Marceau collection, another very special aspect is the motion capture data of Marcel Marceau that was recorded during his 2001 visit. Motion capture uses sensors to track a performer's movements and then maps the data onto a computer model. Ohio State is fortunate to be the home of one of the premier motion capture studios, and the technicians there used motion capture technology to record some of Marceau's signature movements. Here you can see Marceau in the motion capture suit. These motion capture files are now available for viewing by researchers who are interested in using digital methods to analyze this great performer's technique. But it's time to get on to the main event of this webinar, a live conversation with Academy Award nominated actor Jesse Eisenberg and mime artist and movement coach Lorin Eric Salm. I'd like to say a thank you to Mr. Eisenberg and Mr. Salm for their participation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Director of the Theater Research Institute, Professor Janine Thompson.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Beth, thank you so much for that informative and welcoming remarks. I would now like to introduce our guests to two wonderful individuals who are here for our conversation today. Jesse Eisenberg and Lorin Eric Salm. Can you please join us now?
Yes.
Hey, Jesse. Hi, Lorin.
Hi, Janine. Hi, Jesse.
Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
I would like to start by making a few opening remarks, if you don't mind. I just want to say that I absolutely loved the film. I deeply appreciated how the director, Jonathan Yakubovich, told this story and how he chose to show only the essential, including the violence, to tell the story and to touch the heart. Nothing gregarious, nothing gratuitous, only the essential, which is so similar to Marceau's style of storytelling in his mime plays. I was also moved the way that the director chose to utilize mime to further the telling of the story. And Jesse, I absolutely loved your portrayal of Marcel Marceau. I was deeply moved by the innocence and wonder and empathy that you so wholly encapsulated in your performance. And I loved your mime work. It was clear and from the heart. Bravo.
Thank you, Jane. That means a
And
lot.
Lorin, I absolutely loved your work in the film with the mime choreography. And I'm so glad that the director chose a true mime expert to coach this very important film. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine.
So for both of you, I think that you both arrived at expressing the poetry of the heart through even the seemingly simple, specific gestures throughout this entire film. I absolutely love the work of the entire production. Oh my goodness, the young actress, Bella Ramsey, what a great actor. And the woman who played the role of Emma, what is her name?
Clemence Posey.
Oh,
Yeah,
the entire cast. They're absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's get to some questions. So I've got them in categories of introduction, training, and choreography. Okay? Okay, so to begin with, Jesse. Before doing this film, Did you know much about Marcel Marceau or his story, or the story of him saving the lives of hundreds of children? And how did you feel about learning mime for the role and playing the man who is known as being the world's greatest mime?
Well, thank you for your very sweet comments, and thank you to people who are watching this. If you are mainly OSU people, I just want to acknowledge that I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, and I have a rival hat on, which has more to do with my hair than my feelings of rivalry-ness. So anyway, thank you so much for having me here, and I wish it was in person because I love Columbus. It was an incredibly daunting prospect to play not only this real person, but this person who is considered the best in his craft, the world's most famous, mime. Some mitigating factors were that, he was young. There really isn't video of him at this age performing. He was kind of like in his nascent stage, figuring out kind of what his characters would be. And the most kind of like comforting factor was that I was performing mainly for children. And so I had a purpose. And so when I started performing for the kids, this amazing choreography that Lorin had created and that I had studied kind of on my own for so many months, kind of relaxed, and I could just think about entertaining the kids and being spontaneous, having had the kind of, let's say like raw materials practiced over the course of so many months. Oh, in terms of knowing about Marceau, the first time I ever heard, I think the name Marcel Marceau was probably in the Woody Allen joke where he said that he was having he was at a party with a bunch of hippies and they were playing the old record albums of Marcel Marceau.
Yes.
And, and I thought it was just like, well, I didn't really get the joke because I didn't really know who Marcel Marceau was. So I think I looked it up and then I thought it was really funny. I'm the son of a birthday party clown. So my mom used to paint her face like Marceau. It didn't occur to me. Of course, I'm familiar with the image of Marceau because he's an iconic image. And if you think
Right.
of a mime, that's the image that you that most people have in their mind. And when Jonathan, who wrote the script, sent me the script, he had sent me a picture back to back of me and Marceau. And so I could see the kind of the uncanny resemblance.
Yep.
And it occurred to me that he was wearing the exact same face paint as my mother had worn for the last, the 30 years that I, knew her as a clown. And so I realized I did know him, and I did have like an amazing like reverence for that work because it was so similar to the work that my mother did.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lorin, you studied with Marcel Marceau and many other esteemed faculty at his school in Paris. You graduated from his school and you went on to become a movement coach for films in LA. What a remarkable opportunity to work as the mime coach for a movie about Marcel Marceau. Tell us, how did you get this job? How did they find you?
Well, I actually tried to find them first. I had seen, I had seen some information in the press about the development of the film. I think they put out that information around the time Jesse had been cast in the role. And of course, when I saw this, I said, this is a film I have to work on. And I tried everything I could to contact the producers of the film and the producer and director. And for some reason, I couldn't get through to them. I didn't have the right contact information, or I couldn't get messages through to them. And I finally asked someone I know in the industry for help because I thought maybe they would have a contact that I didn't have and could get a message through to the producers and ask them to contact me. So 2 days, literally 2 days after I asked that person for help, Jonathan, the director, called me and asked to meet with me to discuss having me work on the film. And while we were meeting, sometime during the meeting, naturally I'd assumed that he called me when he did because the person I asked for help had gotten through to him. But just to clarify, I said to him, so how did you find me? And he said, I did an internet search and I found you. And without telling him why I was asking, I said, nobody mentioned me to you? Nobody talked to you about me? And he said, no, this week I just looked up on the internet, and that's where I found you. And so it was a complete coincidence that happened 2 days after I asked someone to help make that connection.
It was meant to be.
I guess it was. And that's a story I didn't end up telling Jonathan until about a month ago, actually.
That's great. So moving on to training. This is really a question for both of you. Can you guys describe how you worked together to prepare Jesse to perform the role of Marceau and to perform Mime in the film? For instance, can you talk about your training sessions, what material you covered, how long you worked together on this?
Sure. Do you want to start, Jesse?
Sure. Yeah, we met in Los Angeles in probably April or March of 2018, and I think, if I'm getting my dates right, and I think Lorin had already choreographed every routine I was to do in the movie, and so watching it all together, performed one after another, felt to me like, going to like an NBA basketball game and then telling you like, you're going to hop in there for the second half. Like, it was just this like incredibly daunting thing. But what I loved about it was, I thought the routines were gorgeous, and like, I thought they were like a perfect assemblage of what the movie needed, as well as like honoring Marceau's work with specific motifs. And the other thing I loved about it was like Lorin had seemed so prepared to teach me that what I needed to know for the movie, as opposed to, for example, like learning like, a century's worth of, mime routines. We started to like actually go over poses, like, kind of like the basis of mime way after I started learning the practical routines I had to learn for the movie, which was so helpful for me because I didn't feel like because I had this sense that I was like gearing up for the movie. And as my kind of like appreciation for mime and abilities became stronger, I can kind of like start to look at the basis of the work. It was also in conjunction with me watching Marceau and seeing that what Lorin was teaching me was not really his routines, but really a kind of like a truly perfect inspiration of those routines tailored for the storyline of the movie. And as I like appreciated it from one like creative person to another, even though our crafts are so different, I got a lot more eager to get better and get over that initial frustrating hump that everybody has to get over when they're doing something for the first time.
Right. That's great. Lorin, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess just that, this is something we might address in other senses, but yes, starting with the choreography was a good way of giving Jesse a good idea of where we were trying to go. So if we had just started with general mime training, then we could have been doing that for a while before he had any idea what we were eventually going to try to do with all of this. So this was a very direct way of showing him what the end result was going to be. And then we were able to go back and work on the techniques as needed to get him there, because he certainly didn't need a full training course in mime. Sure, if we had a few years for a full training course in mime, that would have been fantastic, but we didn't have quite that much time. So rather than try and cover everything I would normally teach a mime student, someone who's getting into the study of mime, we were able to focus on those things that went most directly toward him learning the choreography and learning the techniques that he would most need to use to accomplish that choreography.
Are there certain techniques that you use to help prepare an actor who hasn't been trained in mime to do mime? Are there specific steps that you used or that you use when you coach other people?
Well, It partly depends, or it depends a lot on what it is that the actor needs to do for that particular role. Different kinds of, I mean, sometimes I'm coaching someone to do mime, sometimes I'm coaching them to do some other kind of unusual movement. So I'll choose the techniques that will most directly help them accomplish the kind of movement that they need to. The one thing that I teach everybody, whether they're going to be performing a mime role or some other kind of movement role, is a technique called suspension, which is, for me, if you're going to do mime, you have to learn this. And if you're going to do Marceau's mime, it's 10 times as important that you learn this. Otherwise, no matter what else I teach you about Marceau's technique and style of mime, none of it is going to resemble Marceau or is going to mean anything if you don't understand suspension. For those, there are a few people watching who might know what suspension is. For those who don't,
Yeah.
very briefly, it's hard to explain in a few words, but very briefly, it's a way of holding and moving the body in a way that gives visual life to the body, whether you're standing still or whether you're in movement. And it also helps to refine your movement, to make it more clear in what you're expressing. So that's probably the briefest explanation I can give. And it's not an easy thing to learn, and it takes a long time to learn it, but I've found a way of explaining it in a relatively concise way and showing people how to begin quickly to start working on it and incorporating it into what they need to do. So that, and then beyond suspension helps everything I coach people to do. But beyond that, it depends on what they need to do for that particular role, and then I'll select other techniques. In Jesse's case, I probably had to show him more than I would most people, because he had a lot more mime to do in resistance. And he also, it was very helpful for him to understand not just the choreography and learn it, but to understand what was behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, and sorry to make this answer even a little bit longer, but for some projects, I have to teach someone choreography, like we did in this. Like Jesse said, I had all the choreography created already, and I had to teach him to do that choreography. For some films, the actor doesn't have choreographed things. They have to know a certain way of moving, but there isn't what they're going to do. The action isn't pre-choreographed for them. So they have to know the movement techniques well enough to be able to apply it no matter what it is that they end up doing, which is something that even up to the day that they shoot it can change. Or it can even change after that, because they could shoot it and then do another take and the director could ask them to do something different. So they have to know how to apply it. And in this case, even though Jesse was learning specific choreography, it was important that he know the techniques underlying that choreography so that he could use it however he ended up needing to use it, whether that was because of changes in the mime scenes or in other parts of the film that were not part of the choreographed movement, where he might decide to incorporate those in his performance.
How difficult, how challenging. So Jesse, you not only needed to prepare to embody Marceau with your acting, but you also needed to embody his artistry.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that was like really helpful to kind of like, like I've done kind of like specific physical work for characters that are not physical people. I've taken like, fencing classes because I was playing a character who used to fence, even though they're not fencing in the movie. And what I love about doing stuff like that is it just kind of forces your physicality to be a little different, and then that has some impact on your psyche, whether that means you're standing up straight and therefore you feel more confident or whatever. There's a million things that work backwards from the body, from the outside in, so to speak. But with this, it was so integrated. I mean, this is a guy that probably would have been practicing some tiny gesture at every moment. When they're standing on the street corner, they would have been, you know, leaning to the side to try to figure out how far they can lean without falling over. One of the things I remember distinctly was Lorin came to where I was working in Montreal, and we were kind of like walking up and down this little alleyway. They have all these little alleys in Montreal. And I said, what would Marceau be doing, like walking down an alley? How would he walk down an alley? And Lorin was like, you know, kind of walking on different parts of the street. And, you know, there was like a kind of playfulness, but also a discipline, because it's all practicing and it's all kind of like putting forth effort for some purpose. But to an outsider, it can look kind of like playful. I noticed a similar thing with my mother as a birthday party clown. She would make up these crazy songs. And to her, it was like this incredibly disciplined, rigid process of trying to make these funny songs up to entertain 5-year-olds. But if you watched her, you would think this is like a funny person who's playing. And I love stuff like that.
Were there certain moves that you found to be especially difficult? And were there certain moves that helped you enter into the heart of Marceau's artistry?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. There's like the last gesture of the movie is my character is doing this kind of thing. And Lorin talked about suspension earlier. Yeah, there are a few things in that gesture that, you know, one is like a certain kind of, like Lorin was talking about suspension, which is like what I think of like as creating like momentum even in stillness, and a kind of tension even in relaxed movements. And I, you know, that gesture to me explores like how graceful he was, the way the body kind of looks like a cursive rather than print writing. I love that. Then there were gestures that I saw Marceau do that Lorin incorporated in different ways. Like one of his famous routines between the waiter and the restaurant patron. Mm-hmm. And the kind of little, you know, the kind of, you know, prickly gestures that he would do with his face and his hands to kind of create these characters that we immediately understand who they are. And it reminded me of like somebody who's like a great stand-up comedian who's essentially doing these little characters, and they're using, only in retrospect do you realize they were entirely alone with no props, no costumes, and yet you got the full story. And so between those two things, like you have a great sense of somebody who is as funny as they are graceful and dramatic, and they're using the exact same equipment for both.
That's great. So you're starting to speak a lot about the choreography. Let's move on to more specific about that. So this also is for both of you. Were there specific mime moves or specific stories to be told in mime that either you or the director found to be essential to be performed in this movie?
Do you want?
No, please. This is
okay.
Far more curious to hear you. Yeah.
Well, there were some things that Jonathan had written into the script when I first saw the script that that already were reminiscent of Marceau's work. Like there's the walking against the wind illusion that Jesse does with the children. And that's an illusion that Marceau made famous. For those who know Marceau best from his appearance in Mel Brooks' silent movie, that's the walking against the wind illusion that he's doing in that scene, which is probably why that's what he did in that film. So there were things like that. And also, for those who know Marceau's work well, there's a scene in Resistance between Marcel and Emma where Marcel communicates everything he has to say just with hands, only with hand gestures. And that's something Marceau has a piece called The Hands, which is what inspired that. We were trying not to, or our plan was not to use his exact routines or his exact choreography. But what we wanted to do was create choreography that looked like something Marceau could have created, something in his style, something even with his signature movements, or what would later become his signature movements, so that people who know the mime artist that Marceau became could see in this earlier version of him a younger man who would one day become this great mime artist. And we could see hints of the work that he would later create, even if in reality, these things that we were showing were things he was not going to create for a number of years in the future. So that was the idea. So whether I would have suggested Walking Against the Wind or The Hands or not, I'm not really sure. Those were suggested to me, so I choreographed around those suggestions. But the one thing that I absolutely insisted we include in the choreography is exactly the gesture that Jesse just showed you, what Marceau calls the lyrical hand. Because if I had to choose one gesture or one movement that, for me, it embodies the poetry, the beauty, the lyricism of all of Marceau's work, that would be the one single gesture that does it. So not only did I talk Jonathan into letting me include it in the choreography, and in fact, it's the last thing you see in the whole film, I think, but I probably said to Jesse at some point, if somehow you blow all the choreography I teach you and everything else I teach you, this is the one thing you absolutely have to get right. And not only did Jesse do a fantastic job with all of the choreography, but he also worked really hard on that gesture and nailed it. So that made me very happy.
Thanks.
Jesse, were there certain moves in the choreography that were particularly hard for you? Like any of the hand moves?
Yeah, I mean, probably the feat of Walking Against the Wind. They have to go down gradually. Lorin, I think the initial thing he was teaching me was like push down an orange with my feet. I don't know if this is Lorin's technique or if this is universal. You know, that you're kind of squishing the orange with each pushing the foot down. So there's resistance, but not enough, but it's not a rock. And I don't know if I ever got it. In fact, I had like a mime double, you know, which is to say like somebody who was a mime, this wonderful mime, Thompson Legierski, who was in Prague with me. He's a mime from Prague. And he was there, and I told Jonathan, the director, I could do everything in this movie. Please just have him there for my feet, because I cannot squish these oranges appropriately. And so we had him there, and I don't think Jonathan ended up using a shot of the feet. You know, I don't think it was necessary to use a shot of the feet. So there is one shot of Thompson in the movie, which is, it's more of like a stunt, like I roll back, you know, a backward somersault. And that was done more for like safety. Like Thompson is an amazing mime, and he was able to do it in a safe way. And so that's like kind of typical for actors. You don't do like the stunts, you know. But that was probably the most difficult. And to this day, even though I still have like Walking Against the Wind pretty good in my upper body, that's still something that when it occurs to me to like do it a little bit, I feel still not polished.
I don't know if any of us really feel polished with that one.
Oh, okay, that's encouraging.
There's also that, and I was also really impressed with your hands.
Yes, this is something that, this was like, you know, this is something you could do on your own. And then I met a guy who had like studied mime 30 years earlier in Ireland. And I said, oh, you studied mime? I just had done a movie about Marcel Marceau. And he said, can you do this? And I realized, oh, this was like this is like the secret handshake to get into the mime club.
That's so good.
It's a good thing we covered that then.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good.
Really good.
Yeah.
Let's see. Jesse, to what extent did your study of Marceau's mime work and the choreography influence choices you made about Marceau's movement in the non-mime scenes in the film?
Well, you know, here's somebody that like kind of thinks about his body as something that can be expressive. And so that doesn't necessarily mean he's constantly doing mime or that he is particularly graceful. It just means that he's expressive. and that he thinks of his body as an extension of his self-expression. And I also think it's like something that, I'm just trying to think about it like from more of a psychological perspective, like the person that is attracted to mime, and what that means. It's somebody that's interested in self-expression, but it's not somebody that needs to be like domineering, because unlike magicians, which I've played in movies before, which have a kind of similar skill, which have a similar kind of like, you can perform alone. Mimes are not I imagine, mimes are not somebody that need to kind of, command a room as much as let audiences come to them, because it's such a literally quiet art form. And so I kind of thought about that. And then also, watching a lot of interviews with Marceau, he was somebody that took his craft seriously, and he was thoughtful about it in a way that, I don't know, reminded me more of like the way a dancer or a fine artist talks about their work rather than an actor. Actors, I find, talk about their work with a kind of like, I don't know, almost like a self-deprecation that's used maybe to kind of, let's say, endear themselves to an audience because their performance style is not that different from doing an interview. And so when I watched Marceau, I saw a kind of like comfort with himself and his art that was helpful for me.
Oh, that's lovely. Let's get to a question from one of our participants that's joining us today. This is a question from Connor Graham. He is an OSU theater graduate student. And Lorin, he has one for you, and then he's got one for Jesse. Okay?
Great.
Okay, so Lorin, and you kind of addressed this somewhat in the beginning with the training, but Connor gets to a little bit more of a specific nuance at the end of this question. When any performer studying Marceau's technique, for any performer studying Marceau's technique, it is essential to begin with the foundation and decrue. When training a performer under strict time constraints, how much time is devoted to teaching technique or theory versus choreography? And you both kind of addressed this already, but do you have anything else that either of you would like to say, but especially Lorin?
Well, okay, yeah, I mentioned a bit before that it depends greatly on what it is that they need to do for the role and how much foundational technique they need versus going directly to what's required of them in the action of those scenes. For those who don't recognize the name Decrue that Connor mentioned in his question, Etienne Decrue was Marcel Marceau's mime teacher. Yes, for those who don't know, Marceau had a mime teacher. He didn't just make all of this up himself. And Marceau studied a technique that Decrue created called corporeal mime, or dramatic corporeal mime. And although Marceau took what he learned from Decrue in a very different direction than Decrue did, it always remained a foundation of Marceau's work, to the extent that even in Marceau's school, he had us learn Decrue's technique. It was that important to learn Decrue's technique in order to learn Marceau's technique. When it comes to teaching people, though, it partly depends on how much time I have, because learning either one of those, Marceau's or Decrue's, takes a long time.
Right.
But it also depends on what it is that they're going to have to do. So for one thing, in the case of Resistance, for example, almost the entire film takes place before Marceau started studying with Decrue. Marceau had no formal mime training through any period that you see in Resistance until right up around the time of the final part of the film where he performs for the American troops. That was right around the time Marceau started his formal training. So he wouldn't have had that foundation of what he learned from Decrue. So in one sense, it wasn't necessary to teach Jesse that because of that. And for other types of films, again, it depends what they have to do. Just as a quick example, I coached there was a film called Surrogates, where I coached the actors to be different levels of robots. When I say different levels, some very sophisticated robots that were almost human, some that were much more mechanical looking. And there's part of the study of corporeal mime is learning how to break down the body into individual parts and to move them in ways that are isolated from other parts. Not that, I mean, that's only a fraction of what corporeal mime, of what you do with corporeal mime. But one of the techniques in corporeal mime teaches you how to move your body in ways that lend themselves very well to robotic movement if that's how you want to use it. So there's an instance where I would probably teach someone suspension again, but then I might teach them certain corporeal mime techniques if those techniques are going to be most directly related to what they have to do for that film, which is not always the case. It depends on the character and the kind of movement. So,
Right.
But also when I coach people, I have everything between months, like I had with Jesse, and I've literally had as little as 20 minutes to work with an actor to teach them how to do mime for a scene. That wasn't the plan, but if you've ever been on a film set, you know, scheduling doesn't always go according to plan.
Yep.
So I was with 20 minutes and I literally had to stand off camera and do everything as they were doing it while the camera was rolling because we had so little time to work on it ahead of time. So in that case, it's directly to the choreography, no technical time for technique. So it just depends, you know, how much time we have and what I need to be able to get them to accomplish.
That's great, Lorin. Thank you. And the last question is for Jesse. And Jesse, you're known for preparing for a role by closely studying the topic the characters you play specialize in, such as karate, magic, mime. You kind of referred to this a little bit already. Have any of the skills you've used on previous projects influenced your future roles? And do you believe that your new mime training will serve you in future projects?
Yeah, I mean, certainly this movie was the most technique I've ever learned for something, because my character had to be so proficient. And then B, probably the most applicable skill set for my regular job, you know, regular acting. You know, one of the things that I came to realize about Marceau and Lorin and mimes who are great is that, like, there's very little difference between what they're doing and what I'm doing as an actor portraying like literal spoken doing literal spoken scenes. And so it was really kind of more applicable than I expected. I mean, I did like Alexander technique in college, and so there was some like body work there, but that didn't require any kind of like acting, whether, you know, there was nothing humorous about it or, you know, or dramatic. And so this, for me, it reinforced a skill set that I like that I have, which is an ability to express myself without dialogue.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much. We've got some time for a few more things. Lorin, I know that you have a Marceau archive. Would you like to share a few items, and then I've got some closing remarks and open it up for anything else that either of you would like to say. So Lorin, would you like to share a few items from your archive?
Sure. I chose a few things to show you today. You can probably see I have a few things behind me here. One of Marceau's lithographs and some posters, books, programs. But I have a few special things I picked out here that I thought might be of interest for today. Marceau really started his solo mime career in 1947 with the creation of his character Bip, that people who know his work would be familiar with. Prior to starting his own solo career, though, Marceau performed in theater, both verbal theater and mime theater, with other theater companies. And one of the places that he first performed mime theater was with the Madeleine Renaud, Jean-Louis Barrault company. Um, and one of the mime plays that he did that drew a lot of attention to Marceau's talent as a mime was called Baptiste, which was drawn from the famous French film Children of Paradise.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
Baptiste was Jean-Louis Barrault's character in the film. So they did a stage play, a stage mime play based on the character from the film. And in that play, Marceau played the role of Harlequin, or Harlequin, as we would say. So this is a program from that production. This is 1946.
Wow.
And this is a program from that. This was the production Baptiste. You can see, let's see, where is it? Here's Marceau's name in the cast list.
Yep.
Just one of the actors in the cast. And it's strange not to see him, as the headline of the program. And here's a photograph of Marceau.
Yep. Looking very similar to Jesse.
In the cast list. Yeah, here Marceau would have been about 23 years old.
Yeah.
So this is one of perhaps my oldest item in my collection.
That's a treasure.
When Marceau's first performance in the United States was in 1955, and he performed first at the Off-Broadway Phoenix Theater. This is actually a ticket order form for his appearance at the Phoenix Theater, and this is the program from.
Oh my goodness.
His show there. The show was so successful and sold out so completely, they moved it to the Ethel Barrymore Theater on Broadway to accommodate the larger crowds because he was such a sensation. Here's Marceau in this initial program. Whoops, so this is another special item. It's very funny. Jesse completely set me up for one of the other things I wanted to show. This is a Marcel Marceau record.
Yay! Yep.
It's called Marcel Marceau Speaks. I know some might think this is a joke, but actually it's a recorded interview that Marceau did in 1968. That was first released as an LP record album. And then in later years, it was re-released on cassette tape and finally on a CD.
Oh.
And there were actually a couple of interviews in French that were released on smaller records as well.
Wow. What treasures you have, Lorin.
Do I have time for one more? Or
Absolutely.
Okay. This last one is something personal. It's not anything fancy to look at, but it's more what it represents that makes it special to me. This here is an invitation to when Marceau was installed as a member of the Academy of Fine Arts of France in Paris. I was a student of his at the time when the ceremony took place. So as one of his students, we were all invited to attend the ceremony where he was installed as a member. A very formal ceremony at the Academy, and Marceau gave a speech there, most of which I couldn't quite understand yet because I had only been in France for a few months and my French was still limited, but it was amazing to have a chance to be there. This is my invitation to the reception that followed, where I had the unexpected and amazing honor of meeting Marcel Carnet, who was the director of Children of Paradise.
Oh, wow.
I wouldn't even have known it was him. One of my classmates pointed him out to me, and she was brave enough to grab me and walk up to him and introduce ourselves and tell him we were students of Marceau. And we had an extremely brief conversation with him where I think the words that I remember that he said to us were, "Work well."
That's perfect.
But just to have had the chance to meet him for a moment is something that I'll never forget. So that makes these items special, maybe to me more than they would be to anyone looking at them.
Those are absolute treasures, Lorin. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. So we've come to our time. So I've been thinking a lot about the movie, the theme of the movie, and what's going on in the world today, what's going on in our country and what's going on in the world today. And I put together a few thoughts that I don't know if either of you will have anything to say afterwards or not, but I just wanted to share this. I would like to say that after watching the film, I see how pertinent it is for the events we are facing today, with seeing the national and international protests against the brutal, violent abuse of power towards African Americans and other minorities around the world. There is a common theme in this film that unites with what we are experiencing today. And that is, it is essential to engage in resistance against those who oppress a race of people. It is as important then as it is today. We must learn from our history, but unfortunately, we can see how we are repeating it. So I see now more than ever, there is still the need for resistance. Any closing thoughts that either of you have to say?
Well, I really loved that you drew that really nice connection. And to add to it, if I may, like the movie shows how like people who are not prepared to be helpful, certainly not prepared to be heroes, end up using what it is that they excel in to help others. I mean, who would expect that a mime doing one-man shows in small bars or wherever he was performing for his friends would become somebody who can save lives. And, you know, we're not living in an exact same time, but it's similarly chaotic. And there are people who need help. And so, you know, it's probably, I hope the movie inspires people to look inside themselves and see what it is that they do well and how they can apply that to helping other people.
Thank you, Jesse. Anything else, Lorin?
I don't know that I can add a lot to connecting the relevance of the story of the events going on in the story to the events that we're experiencing now. But I could just say that Marceau was very much interested in having his work appeal to all people, regardless of not only language that mime transcends very well, but regardless of any differences that we have, nationality, race, culture. What made his work appeal to people everywhere in the world is that he tried to tap into what we have in common, those things that are universal human truths that we all share, that we all recognize. That was the basis of his work. So in that sense, I guess there's a message somewhere in there too, about looking for what we have in common and finding ways to transcend our differences, whether in art or in life.
Thank you, Lorin. Boy, Jesse and Lorin, thank you so much for this inspiring and informative conversation. And again, I want to congratulate you on the astonishingly beautiful film, Resistance. Thank you both very, very, very much.
Thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for inviting
Yes.
me, Lorin.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jesse, for having this conversation with us, and thank you, Janine, for hosting us.
Absolutely. I also want to thank our audience for joining us today. And I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. I want to give a sincere thank you out to the Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee Theater Research Institute and the families who have built this. Thank you. And finally, I want to thank the OSU libraries for making this all possible, specifically Casey Kramer. Thank you. So now I will hand it back over to Casey Kramer. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Lorin. Thank you, Janine, and thank you, Beth. Thank you to all of the attendees that joined us today. So be watching in the next 7 to 10 business days. We will have this recording available for you all to watch again and again. I know I will. And we will also be sending out an email within the next couple of days with a couple of other resources as well. So thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.